Hi everyone, I'm Matt, the critter part of the Critter and the Butterfly YouTube channel. Welcome. This is another one of our How We Did It videos. We really needed to do a power upgrade in our Trailmanor, but this is the way we did it. There's a bunch of different ways to accomplish this, but this is just the way we chose. So sit back, relax, grab a cold drink, and check out how we did it. When we purchased our new-to-us 2011 Trailmanor 2720 SL travel trailer, it came with the optional 85-watt solar panel, a 15-amp PWM solar controller, and two 105 amp-hour AGM batteries. The system would keep the batteries charged with minimal DC power use when camping, and kept them topped off in storage. We wanted the option to power the trailer without hookups, and to be able to use our trailer as a sort of lifeboat in case something unforeseen happened that would cause us to leave our home. A DC and AC power upgrade was needed. We added a Renogy 200-watt solar kit with their Rover MPPT solar controller and all the assorted breakers, cables, mounts, and connectors that we had from another install. We also installed a 3000-watt pure sine wave inverter. We weren't expecting to ever use all 3000 watts, but an over-design looked like a good way to go. We wanted to be sure to use the proper size cables, use fuses and breakers on all positive cables, and keep the cables as short as practical. We used the Renogy Z-brackets with VHB tape and short sheet metal screws to secure the panels to the roof of the trailer, and sealed everything with Dicor lap sealant. The panels were installed and the cables run across the roof and secured with U-clips. Because the Trailmanor folds, we had to get creative compared to a hard wall trailer. We routed the cables down the wall in wire mold, made a left at the bottom of the shell through another piece of wire mold to the lift arm, and went down to the bottom of the trailer box, leaving extra cable at each rotation point for movement. The panel cables were routed along the underside of the trailer and through a hole under the bathroom cabinet. From there, they went through the cabinets to the Rover 20. The battery cables and temperature sensor cable went back through the floor in the bathroom, under the trailer to a spot under the battery bay, and through a hole in the floor to connect through a breaker to the battery bank. The holes were filled with silicone and sealed with aluminum tape. The breaker also acts as a disconnect. We also replaced the 30-amp fuse that was installed on the positive cable for the trailer 12-volt power with a 30-amp breaker. Our first power upgrade worked fine, but the AGM batteries were starting to show their age. They only last so long. It was time to make the move to more capacity, so we decided to make the leap to lithium. We stayed with Renogy and another 200 watts worth of their 100-watt 12-volt panels. And from Victron Energy, we acquired their Smart Solar 10-30 MPPT solar charge controller with the BWV712 power monitor. The storage chores are being handled by two 100 amp-hour Battleborn LifePo 4 batteries purchased a few months apart. We've noticed the screwless mounting method has been gaining a large following for mobile solar installs, so this time the panels were secured to the roof with 3M VHB tape covered with Eternabond roof tape. The position of panel 2 was marked with painter's tape and put in place. Then panel 1 was placed next to it. Later, the Eternabond roof tape was put down. The cables followed the 85-watt panels cables across the roof and along the edge of the front shell. From there, they followed the other cables down the lift arm to the frame, and then headed back inside the frame to the battery bay. As the Renogy 20 was no longer going to be used, it was removed, and those 100-watt panel cables were rerouted from the bottom of the lift arm to the battery bay. All of the holes were filled with silicone and sealed with aluminum tape. So before we start our tour of the battery compartment, I thought I'd go over cables real quick. We made all of our own. So it's a little bit of a process, but it's definitely worth it to have custom cable lengths. When you pick up your cables, you want to make sure that they're 100% copper. You don't want tinned copper, you don't want aluminum, none of that funny business. All of ours are welding cable, lots of strands in them. Same with this guy here, there's lots of strands, pure copper, nice jacket. You want to check the charts to make sure that for the amperage you're running through these cables and the distance you're running them, that they're going to be safe. Never undersize cables. If you can afford to, oversize them, because it's a little more security and peace of mind in your installation. So crimping them really is pretty easy. I kind of do the dinosaur way. There are a lot of nicer ways to do this than I'm doing it. But all I do is just figure out how much I need by lining it up with the connector, which are all copper. All of them pure copper. No funny business there. And I just take my cutter, lightly score the jacket, twist, off it comes, no extra strands, very nice. Then we just put it inside, twist as we install it. There we go. And one connector ready to be crimped. Same with these big guys, you just score it, pull it. It can be kind of tough getting all these little teeny wires in there, or strands in there, but it goes. Anyway, and there you go, you're all ready. Once you crimp these things, then you take your cable in and you put it up where you want it to run from pole to pole, and you cut the cable. So when you put your connector on, it's the right length, so be sure to add distance for your connector. There you go. Now we'll go outside and crimp these guys. So as far as crimping these things goes, you want to have a nice tight crimp. You don't want to leave any excess room in there, it'll make heat, and heat is bad. Now I use one of these things. It's like Ancient of Days style. I've been using it since chickens had lips. But it works. You can get drill operated ones, hydraulic presses that do the same thing. But for me, it's nice, clean, easy. What we're gonna do is we're gonna take this thing, put this guy inside, so the hammer part ends up right in the middle between the end and where it gets narrow. We'll make sure it's straight. There we go. And all you do is take the hammer of Thor and beat it. You know you've got a good crimp, number one, because it's warm, but that is solid. That's not going anywhere. Squished here, squished on the bottom. That is a nice crimp. So with these big guys, it's the same deal. Open them up, center it, make sure you're straight, and hold it down and just hit it. You know when it's done because it makes that nice solid sound. And it's warm, and this guy is crimped. So there we go. That is how we made our cables. Here's this guy and this guy, and they're ready for the next step, because you don't just leave them like this. There's one more thing to do. All right, so we're back inside. So we've got our cables done. Ends are crimped on. We've made sure they were the right length. Put the connector on the other end. Once that's all done, the final step is your heat shrink. When you put your heat shrink on, you want to make sure it does not lay where the hardware is going to go, so you want it back so you have no interference for your hardware. So we'll just measure this out real quick from where this drops down to about there, and cut it. There we go. You want to leave at least a good 1.5 inches. Then all you've got to do once you get it lined up is heat it. There are other ways of doing this too. There's heat guns and butane torches and all kinds of different things you can get, but like I say, I've been doing this way for a long time, and it always works for me. I suppose a heat gun would be a lot quicker, but you go ahead and heat it up until it's all nice and tight. Now these things have an adhesive on the inside that helps them stick and seal. And there we go. And we'll do this one. Slide that on there so it's just even with where it starts coming up. And heat it. You definitely want to have these on there. Electrical tape's not going to do it, but heat shrink will stay. Electrical tape will unravel or shrink or just start coming apart, but heat shrink will stay. It gives you a nice moisture tight connection. There you go. That is done. Now you just go in and install. I wanted to add in here real quick, make sure that you use quality cable and quality connectors. Size them properly and you'll have no problems at all. Do shortcuts. Small cables, bad connections equal heat. Heat is bad. So here we go with the tour. Well, this is where the magic happens. This is the business end of our power upgrade. In the 2720, the batteries are in this location originally, so we just added everything else to it. Looks like a lot of tech and cables just all over the place in here, and it is, but once you figure out who the main players are, it's a little easier to understand it. So we have our 2 solar charge controllers. They take the voltage that's made by the solar panels and change them into something the batteries can use. We have 2 100-amp-hour batteries that are in parallel with 4-aught cables, so the system just thinks it's one big 200-amp-hour battery. And we have the shunt back here. The shunt can tell what's coming into the batteries and what's going out of the batteries, so it can give you an idea of how you're doing. So we'll start off with our main solar panels. The positive comes in through the bottom of the battery bay through its own passage. Comes in 8 gauge and 10 gauge. It goes through a breaker, which we also use as a disconnect. It comes out of those in 6 gauge, goes to a binding post, and into the controller in 6 gauge. Out of the controller, again in 6 gauge, it goes to its own breaker to protect the system, 30 amp, and from there it goes to the number 2 battery positive. The negatives from the solar panels, they have their own passage through the bottom of the battery bay. They come in 10 gauge and 8 gauge to the binding post, 6 gauge to the controller, and then 6 gauge around to this negative binding post right here. So for the Renogy, the 80 watt panel comes in through these two 10 gauge wires, the green and the black, comes into the controller. The positive out of the controller comes out in 6 gauge, goes through its own breaker to disconnect, around and to the number 2 battery positive pole. The negative comes out of the Renogy in 6 gauge, goes under, around and up, and to this twin binding post right here with the rest of the grounds. Okay, we'll start with the positive side. Out of the positive terminal on the number 2 battery, we come out in 4/0 to our 400 amp main fuse. If something goes sideways, this will protect what it can. Out of the 400 amp main fuse in 4/0, we come to a twin binding post. On this side, we come out in 4/0 to a 300 amp fuse. Out of this 300 amp fuse in 4/0 to our inverter. If anything goes sideways in the inverter, this fuse will protect the system. Out of the other side of the twin binding post, we come out in 6 gauge to a 70 amp breaker, which we can also use as a disconnect. Out of that breaker, in 6 gauge, we come around, down, and through the bulkhead, and that ends up at the 12 volt converter charger and 12 volt distribution in the trailer. So all the negatives end up on this twin binding post. We have our solar panel grounds here. We have our trailer grounds here. Again, solar panels, they come in 6 gauge. The trailer grounds come in 10. And we have a ground in 4/0 for our inverter. It comes around to the inverter. Everybody ties in here, then via a 4/0 cable, it goes to the shunt. From the shunt in 4/0, it goes to the number 1 battery negative post. Having the negative on number 1 and the positive on the number 2 battery helps it to act like a single battery and drains them both equally. Now the shunt, being in line like this, can tell what's coming in and what's going out of the batteries, so it can give you a good idea of how your batteries are doing. To see how that's working, we have a little data cable here, and it runs around, down, through the bulkhead, and goes to the meter in the trailer, which gives us all the information we need on the batteries. The shunt also has a positive cable to power it. It runs down, around the corner, and has a fuse of its own, and it attaches to the number 2 positive on the batteries. So that's a walkthrough of all the stuff we've got back here in the battery bay. It's a pretty tight fit, but it's all in here. Now let's go inside the trailer and see what's going on in there. Once the cables are through the bulkhead back there, the battery cable runs to our converter and distribution, and the data cable runs through the bathroom, through the cabinets, to our meter. The 12 volt converter in the power center also needed to be upgraded to a Progressive Dynamics 4655 LIV that could charge LiFePO 4 batteries. It came with all the parts needed for the install, but the 12 volt fuse panel wouldn't fit, so we had to reuse the old one. We also had to upgrade the breaker and feed cable from the batteries to the converter to accommodate the higher charging current. We picked up a wired remote from Leisure Time Distributing for 4600 series converters that takes care of manual control of the 12 volt converter's charge rates if it's ever necessary. That function was on the Progressive Dynamics 12 volt fuse panel that we couldn't use. So the cool part about the Victron equipment that we've installed is that it's all Bluetooth. So you can connect it to your phone, and with the Victron Connect app, you can get real-time and history information from your devices. We'll look at the solar charge controller first. And it tells you what you've coming into your panels, what you've got going out to your battery from the controller, and a big display just to let you know what's coming in. It's got a history display that tells you what was coming in from your panels and what was going out to your battery. And if it'll come on, there we are. There's a graphical display of what's been going on with the system. You can check it out and see if there are things going on that don't quite look the way they're supposed to. This is a quick and easy way to spot it. And the BWV712, so it tells us our batteries are completely full, which is why we weren't getting anything in on the solar meter. Tells you how much is coming into your batteries, how much is going out of your batteries, and how much longer your batteries are good for at the current draw. Also gives you a history of how much you've generated and how much you've used, and a few other handy statistics. And again, a graph to give you a chance to look at different trends, to spot if something's going a little strange. You can pick it up off here. It also has alarms that'll let you know if something's out around. So it's a pretty cool system. Real-time monitoring history, very nice and very handy, so you know what your system's doing and how much your trailer's eating, really. So you can make adjustments if you have to. So the Victron Connect App and Victron devices with Bluetooth to keep your system happy. That's the DC power upgrade for our 2011 Trailmanor 2720 SL. If we need more solar, it'll be easy to connect it to the Renogy 20 as a ground array. The third battery, that'll take a little more thought. A solar install or power upgrade can be done on most any RV. Be sure to use quality parts and cables. A safe install is a happy install. Once you figure out how much you need, what parts you need, and where you want them, you'll be well on your way to camping without hookups. Good luck with your upgrades. So as part of our power upgrade, we needed to rewire the transfer switch. So what we did, because we don't want to run the Progressive Dynamics charger while we're on the inverter, we wired it up with an extension, and it will now be powered when the shore power side of the transfer switch is activated. When the inverter side of the transfer switch is activated, it won't be powered. So that is the basic idea. So there it is. Looks pretty ugly, but it's done. Took a while of cable wrestling to get this accomplished. We've got our shore power and our Progressive Dynamics charger hooked into the top part. We've got our inverter hooked into the middle, and we've got our distribution panel coming out the bottom. When we're running off shore power or the generator, the Progressive Dynamics charger will operate. When we're running off the inverter, it will not. Now, to seal this thing up, get it back in there. Hey, thanks for stopping by and checking out the video. We really appreciate it. If you liked it, be sure you click that thumbs up button underneath the video there. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and click the bell icon so you get notified when we upload something new. Thanks again for stopping by, and safe travels.